All right, Trevon. So let's get into this trade deadline. And I'm just going to get straight to it. Which team do you think had the best trade of this trade deadline?
Yeah, so I think it's a unanimous choice of who had the best trade deadline. Everybody's pretty much been talking about it. I think it's pretty clear that the New York Knicks have done a really good job of turning this roster around. You essentially turn RJ Barrett and Emmanuel quickly into OG Anunoby, and you pretty much just shipped out a whole bunch of role players that didn't really get consistent minutes. A guy like Quentin Grimes, who had some good moments, but didn't really get to find that consistent minutes from them. Evan Fournier, who 2 seasons ago was getting a lot of minutes, but it just wasn't really panning out for them how they thought it would. And you turn them into Alec Burks, who was there before, and Bojan Bogdanovic, who I think was a really good pickup because one, he's a veteran. He can space the floor. He can do some playmaking for you. So I think they had a really good trade. I wouldn't say deadline because OG and Anunoby happened a few weeks prior to the trade deadline. So I just think their trades in totality have really transformed the way that we view the New York Knicks, especially in this season. Because as we mentioned before in last week's series of videos and last week's podcast, we talked about how that number 2 seed is an opening and how the Bucks are looking very vulnerable. Even after
Yeah.
this trade deadline, we were expecting them to make a few more moves, but the assets that they shipped out in that Dame trade is probably what hindered them being able to make a move for this deadline. They added a guy in Patrick Beverly who is a good defender, but he's still undersized. He's not the best offensive player. He doesn't stretch the floor too well. So I think that is something that can help them, but I don't think it's going to raise them to that championship level. And as you look at the buyout market, I don't really see players that can really address the need that they were really looking for. Even with Doc Rivers being there, they're still struggling. They were 1-4 to start since Doc took over, and I think it was pretty much how a lot of us viewed it that changing the coach wasn't going to really address the things that they needed to address. So, with that being said, behind Boston, I think we are all pretty much on the same page that Boston would be number one. The Joel Embiid injury that happened, that's also gonna open it a lot more, not only for the Knicks, but some other teams. The Cavs have been looking very good. They decided to keep Donovan Mitchell. They were on a really high win streak. They're finding their stride. So I think that this really puts them in a position to really take control of their own destiny and give them a good chance against pretty much any team. I think the Boston Celtics are pretty much beatable as well. They had a good addition in getting Xavier Tillman to pretty much fortify that big man rotation. You have Kristaps, of course. You have Al Horford, who was a little older. They lost some of their bigs last year. Williams last year, who was pretty much injured. So they've been pretty thin at that position for a while now. And just bringing in Xavier Tillman will help them fortify that spot. Pretty much not more so in the big picture as far as playoffs, even though I think he can contribute in the playoffs. But I think just to get them through this regular season was a big move for them. But once the playoffs come, I think that the Knicks can pretty much match up against the Celtics, as we mentioned before. They played them very good in their past matchups. So I like the chances that the Knicks have. And I think that at first, a lot of people, not everybody was a fan of that OG Anunoby trade, even though majority was. I was skeptical of it personally. So I think they really proved me wrong. You were a fan of it. You were looking at it from more so from a futuristic standpoint of how this sets them up. But I think the biggest thing is not only did they get players that can contribute right now, but they still have space to get a max player in the off season. And I
Yeah.
think this is something that the front office for the Knicks were really lacking was just strategic planning and how they execute things. They were kind of how a team like the Lakers are going big fish hunting. And a lot of times that big fish they went after wasn't even really in their prime. They were going after older stars. And at first, when they got the Jalen Brunson, a lot of people thought he was being overvalued or overpaid. And I think he's really the key that really allowed for all these moves that followed him coming over to the Knicks. I think he is really what gave that front office confidence. Like, okay, we have a guy who's a leader, who's productive, who shows up in big moments. We feel comfortable enough to really make all in type of moves to really take winning seriously because we have a guy like Jalen Brunson. And I think it's really a testament to him as well as the front office and just how they've executed all of these moves they made, which is why we're taking them serious now when we wouldn't have in recent years. So I think they by far had the best not only trade deadline, but just trades throughout this whole season, if you're including Anunoby.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think that you can really argue against that, especially when you take into consideration what they did with the OG Anunoby trade. And you just talked about big fish hunting, right? And the New York Knicks have been trying to go big fish hunting for a while now. You remember when they tried to get Kevin Durant, there was talk about setting up the timeline so that once Giannis becomes available and becomes a free agent, that they would be in position to get him. And I remember going back to when they got Amari Stoudemire and Carmelo Anthony was a trade, but they were going after superstars, right? And a lot of the times, at least in my recent memory with the New York Knicks, as I've watched basketball since I was a kid, it was a lot of them trying to go big fish hunting and either not catching any fish at all, or they would catch a fish that they would try and convince everybody they're a big fish, right? And
Yeah.
you mentioned that they would usually get people that might be past their prime or whatever the case may be. But I think that over this past span of about 3 years or so, they've actually gotten really good pieces. They've done their due diligence and they're doing a lot better in the front office in terms of building out the roster. You just mentioned getting Jalen Brunson and how he's actually turned into this star player that nobody really thought he could be when the Knicks actually signed him, right?
Yeah.
Everybody was
Hmm.
saying that here goes the Knicks again. They're just getting a player that they're trying to say is going to be really good, but they're only at this level. And Jalen Brunson has shown us that, man, he's a legit star right now. He is a bona fide all-star. And getting OG Anunoby and now Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks. Alec Burks actually played for the New York Knicks and gave him some good minutes. And I think Alec Burks can fill in those Emmanuel Quickly minutes that we were talking about a while ago when they traded Emmanuel Quickly. We were talking about coming off the bench. How are you going to generate offense and fill in those gaps now that you traded away Emmanuel Quickly? And they also have Miles McBride that kind of filled in those Emmanuel Quickly minutes as well. But now you just have Alec Burks that you could throw in there also. So that was really good. And I think I agree with you. The New York Knicks had probably the best trade deadline as well, and especially if you factor in them trading for OG Anunoby a few weeks ago. Also, I also think that the Thunder had a good trade deadline as well, getting Gordon Hayward. If you're talking about compared to everyone else, I think Gordon Hayward is a player that could help win now, but also bring along those younger guys and help them out in terms of going into the playoffs, preparing for playoff basketball and winning now, but development for the future as well. And then, like you just mentioned, the Celtics. I did really like this Xavier Tillman trade to the Celtics. I think that he can help give them some different options at the center position. And he had really good games last year, especially when the Grizzlies played the Los Angeles Lakers. He had a big game in that series, and he's a guy that does the dirty work. He rebounds, plays tough, and he can score the basketball a little bit as well. So I think that the Celtics did a really good job there.
I agree with you. That was a good trade as well. And I also like what the Dallas Mavericks did.
Mm.
I think that Grant Williams wasn't really panning out how they probably envisioned. Seth Curry wasn't really finding many minutes. I think that adding a player in PJ Washington was really big for them. Simply because I think just getting a lot of athletes around your guys like Luca and Kyrie is
Mm-hmm.
really going to cover up the things that they may not be where it may not be their strong point. Now we know that
Yeah.
Kyrie is an athletic guy because all the movements that he does, you have to be an athlete. A lot of people think of athlete as above the rim. That's not always the case. Sometimes you could be athletic just simply with how quick you can cut, make change of pace, which is everything that we think of when it comes to Kyrie. So and then also Luca, he's not your typical athletic. He is a physical guy. He can dunk the ball and things like that, but he's not going to do that for real. So he
Yeah.
likes to play at his pace, and you don't really say much because he's one of the best players at the league because the way that he plays is extremely efficient. And
Hmm.
also getting a guy like Daniel Gafford
Gafford. Yeah.
from the Washington Wizards. I think that's a very good fit for them as well because every time I would see, for whatever reason, if I saw a Washington Wizards basketball game, he was a guy that always stood out to me simply because of his motor and his energy that he brought. And as a big man, that's something that you really would love to see.
Yeah.
A lot of bigs have that skill to have that touch, all the talent, but that motor just isn't always there. And you always just think like, if they had that motor, like what kind of player would they be? If they took their skill set and that motor, they would be all world. We hear people talk about that a lot of times. And Gaffer is a guy that's really going to fit because he provides that. And he can finish above the rim if you throw the lob to him, and he can rebound. He'll play hard. He'll do the things that you would want your big man to do. And to pair him up with a guy like Luca in a pick and roll game, or just to, shore up that big rotation that you have, I
Rotation.
think that's going to help him a lot. I really like what Derek Lively has been able to do in his rookie season. He's provided rim protection. He's also provided above the rim finishing when it comes to alley oops, and that's something that pairs perfectly with a guy like Luca. He's going to draw that defense in because he's going to pretty much make them think that he's going to shoot the ball, and that's going to draw that attention. And then he can do like a bailout at the last second of, let's say, if he's acting like he's about to take a floater, instead of finishing that floater off, he could just do that touch pass to the alley oop. And Derek Lively has done really well with that. And I think Gafford can provide offense in the same way while also providing that energy on defense and both ends, going after the boards, being that physical presence, bringing that energy around your guys that you already have. And I think this is just going to add to a big lineup that's been very well, such as the White Powell and Maxi Kleber, who have both been providing pretty well, throughout their stint with the Mavericks. And I think this is just going to provide a different archetype in that spot that can really benefit this Mavericks team. So I like what they did in adding PJ Washington with him being a Charlotte Hornet. We've seen him have those big explosive games. And we've also seen him have some pretty underwhelming games. I think the consistency is the thing that a lot of people were not very happy about with his time in Charlotte. But you can definitely see that he can produce and provide for a team. And I think in a situation like this, where he has that superstar that nobody's going to question the roles, you have a proven guy in Kyrie. I think it'll slot him better, and he'll be able to play to his strengths, which is athleticism. His shot has gotten better, but it's for sure athleticism, and he can be a plus player offensively. And I think it's just going to be a matter of fact of him taking it upon himself to really, continue to work on those defensive aspects of the game. I think with him not having to be one of the main guys every night, I think that's really going to go a long way for him. And the Dallas Mavericks fans are really going to see his impact that he can provide.